What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over more advancements for our command list system. So let's get into our game here, and specifically what we're going to be able to do today is control through the different commands using either a keyboard or a controller, and so we'll be able to move through them with inputs as opposed to just scroll the scroll box. This is going to come in handy because we're going to change details about what we see on the command list, such as the video, perhaps the description and name of the move on the side if we want to have more details shown about these things. But you can see at the top here, I have this light attack move, and it is actually a gray box compared to the blue. It is a bit hard to tell, so I'm going to show you my mouse. This is like, these are all light blue, and this is a light gray. Perhaps not my best color scheme for showing them as different, but as I move down here, okay, I can press a button and move down through the list, and the scroll box will move as well while I am doing that until I get to the bottom of the list. I can also go back up and it will scroll up the list. So we can actually go through our commands here, and the scroll box will stay where we are, but we'll be able to keep track of which one we are on. So not only is this good for actually viewing the commands, but like I was saying, if I show my mouse here again, I have this video here, which right now is still only playing the standard light attack video, but we could have a video for each of these, and we could change this for every single command, and we'll be covering that in the next command list episode. So there's that, and then also like we could have a description of the move, we could have frame data about the move if we wanted, whatever you want to put in here, and you could have it all dynamic, so it's based off the selection the character is currently on. Now this is with the keyboard, so as I'm pressing up and down on the keyboard for my standard menu controls, I am able to go through them. I also have the controller here, which I can use the left stick. You could bind it to the D-pad, whatever as well, and go through this. I still have the gamepad scroll. A while ago we set up the command list with the scrolling on the gamepad, and we can still do that, and we can do it separately from the movement. So if we want to be on medium attack, but I want to scroll down and see what's down here, and then scroll back up, I can do that and we'll still remain on medium attack. So we have a lot of freedom here with this menu, with both keyboard and controller. Lastly, I've added a back button now. I can't actually access it from the keyboard or from the controller, but I can press a button on either the keyboard or controller, which I call return P1. So any of my menus that, like the character select or the stage select, if I press the back button essentially, which is the B button on an Xbox controller, or backspace on the keyboard, I can then return. I can also click on it with my mouse. Either way, we will return back out of the command list. So now we don't have to be stuck in here and have to close the game like we had to in the past. So we got a lot of improvements for the command list today, and I'm excited to get started. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's get started. Before we do, if you want to get caught up in the series, I believe this is episode 145 of the fighting game tutorial series. If you'd like to get caught up to everything we've done in the series, we've done a lot. There's a lot more to do, don't get me wrong, but we've come a really long way. And if you want to get caught up to how we got this far and keep up with our progress, then here's the playlist in the top right corner. You can check out every episode we've done for the fighting game tutorial series, as well as a few additional ones that can help you do some additional techniques and mechanics. Otherwise, if you don't want to see the whole playlist, I will link you to this episode right here, which is the first episode for the command list. So we are building off of the command list and the command list elements that we made in the previous episodes. So you want to make sure that you've at least watched those to set those up properly. That way we can go on and continue with this episode. All right. With all that said, we're ready to get started. So this is going to be light on the code today. There's only going to be one or two things that will change in the code and add in the code. The rest of it is going to be in the blueprints because it's going to be within the widgets. So let's go to our command list widget as a start because that is the main thing today. So command list is this one. This is the actual menu. To get started, you might as well add the back button. We'll do everything while we're here. So you can actually just add a button on the screen like I have. Call it back button. and then add text to it. You can add the text by dragging text onto the button. And I called it back button text, and I gave it a text of back. I set my font, I set my outline size, all that good stuff. You can see all my button variables set up here. My style is my standard normal button. I've got all this stuff ready to go. This is stuff you've seen a bunch of times over in this series if you've been watching the whole way through. So I don't think I need to show you too much more than that. It's just adding a button, adding text to it, and putting it here. Better yet, if you want, you can even copy it from another screen. Like I copied it from my character select. Copied the entire button, pasted it in the command list. Then I chose the position I wanted and anchored it in the bottom left and things like that. But there you go. So I've added the back button. Now this is what my screen looks like right now. Again, I have a title up here, which should be the name of the character, but I don't bind it to anything yet. Here's my video section. And again, you could have notes or frame data or something under it as well if you wanted. Alright, so we've added the back button. Let's go into the graph. And let's take a look at what we've got. We're going to have to make a few additions to the event construct here, so let's go over this again. So currently, the commands are on the character themselves. I've seen a few good methods that show it as being inside of a struct, being inside of a data table, or being inside of a separate like static array you can access. So there's a few different ways we could do this. Right now, our commands are on our character, and I'm leaving it that way for the moment. We're not going to change that. So we need to get our owning player pawn to cast to our base character BP so we can grab our character commands list. This open source is to play the video. Right now, we only have that one video, so I'm just playing it in event construct and not playing it based off the selected command we were on, so you don't have to change anything with that. Then what we were doing is taking our character commands array and looping through it. There's a few things extra here now because we need to keep track of our movement throughout this menu. So just like our other menus, like our character selection screen and things like that, we had a current selection and then a max selections. All right. So we're going to basically mimic that sort of behavior here because what we need is we need the ability to know which command we're on and grab the data from it. Since the rest of the series I haven't used the standard Unreal controlling logic and navigation logic, I'm going to continue that theme and we're going to use our own today. This one's going to be simpler than most because right now I can only go up and down this menu. And there's even less things that we can do. I don't have a way to confirm anything. It's just as you scroll over them, they get selected. But we still are going to need the current index we're on, or current selection, might be a better name, and then the max selections as well. So I recommend you make two variables here. Current selection, current index, and max selections. So whatever you want to call these guys. Now, current index, once you make these are both integers, so make a new variable, name them, and set them to be integers. Compile, save, all that good stuff. Now, typically, after I did that, I would have to set max selections to be a default value, and current index would be 0. However, that only works when I know the exact amount of things that I have. Sometimes I may want it to be dynamic, and this is because some characters may have more moves than others. Because of this, we don't want to necessarily set the max selections to a default maximum value, but instead we could actually get this data from the number of commands that we have. So what I recommend doing is taking the character commands that we were looping through, pulling off of it, grabbing the length of it. Length returns the number of items in the array. So it's not counting the indices, like an array, if you access index 0, that's actually the first one. This is the actual number of elements. So if there are 0 through 9, 10 elements in the array, this will return 10, which is exactly what we want for max selections. So we can literally drag off of the length and set our max selections variable. All right. Now with that, good to go. We're setting this immediately. This will only work if this base character BP is valid, if this cast works and this is valid. If it works at this point, each character should have some commands, except for maybe there are special cases like AI enemies that might not have commands, whatever, that could be handled later as a separate case. So everyone should have commands, which means max selection should always be set to the appropriate value. With that done, we can go into the for loop, and luckily I didn't change anything with this actual for loop, so anything you have here is still good. I won't go over it all because we went over in depth in the earlier episodes, but essentially here we are grabbing each of our commands and making an entry for it. We have this command list element widget here, and it is this little border with the name and the actual inputs required. And we go through the inputs of each command, grab the data, and fill out this widget, then add it to the command list vertical box that we have here. Okay, and that's really what we're doing, is we have this box here that is going to keep track of all these command list elements. So again, you don't have to change anything, but quick refresher on what that does. There is one other thing I added, and that was on the completed, but we need to make this function first, so you can ignore it for now. I'll come back to it once we've made this function. Alright, the other thing we had in here was the move scroll box down. And so move scroll box down is what I was showing you earlier, where you can actually, we can just move the scroll box. We weren't moving the value, but we were just scrolling through the scroll box. We did this on the gamepad so we could see the commands while we have a gamepad and not the keyboard. But now since we can actually select individual commands, we don't really need it. However, I still think it's cool to have it, and I think it's useful to be able to scroll down without changing your selection. So you can feel free to keep it. You can also keep it as a demo if you want to have other scroll boxes. I'm going to keep it. But again, this was covered in another episode. Not going to go over it. Just a quick refresher. Now the rest of the stuff in this episode is going to be new stuff. So that's all the stuff we had. Now we got some new things going on here. Alright. Now, in the previous episode, the upgraded pause menu, we used a widget navigation interface. And when actions occurred, such as the up button, the menu up button was pressed, the menu down button was pressed, we could call an event on the interface, and the widgets could capture it. Even if they're paused, all that good stuff, they could still capture it, and then we could move freely throughout those menus. And that was a really nice way to do menus. Well, because of that, we're going to use that method going forward, but on top of using that method going forward, it's especially important that we do this logic this way because this command list is currently being accessed through the pause menu. So we do need to be able to access these input action events when the game is paused through the pause menu, right? Because remember, listen for input action doesn't work when the game is set to paused. It's not listening. All right. So if you remember how we did that, we actually set it up in the code. So we're going to go to the code now. And we have a widget navigation interface. Again, we set this up in the previous episode. Now, to this point, everything was exactly as you saw it. The only thing I've added today is a back button and a back function, excuse me. So it's not super important that you look at all this. All this is still the same. You don't have to worry. If you already set this up, you're not going to have to change almost anything. I would recommend adding this back button. This is another U function as a blueprint implementable event because we need to handle it in the blueprints on that widget. But it's also blueprint callable because we're going to be calling it through the base character BP today. I intended to change it to the controller, but with everything else we've done today, that'll be in a separate episode for it. I just called it void back. You could call it return, you could call it menu back, whatever, just as long as you know you're going back from the menu that you're in. So once you add this function, you can go into the editor, go to your base character BP. Now, in the previous episodes, we had set up menu down P1, menu up P1, menu confirm P1 for the pause menu. For this episode, we're going to add the move down, move up functions to the command list widget, which we actually already have a command list widget reference to. So you can either use this method, get all widgets of class, and choose command list widget. So command list. Or you can use this widget that already exists. If you've been following the series, we created it for this purpose, the gamepad menu scroll down. And we have this command list widget. And that's what I've done. I just use that. So you can copy that node, or you can just get a new one. But again, right now, since we're not doing it through the controller, I'm doing it through the base character BP. We'll definitely be doing it through the controller. Don't worry. Just didn't have enough time to set this up with the other logic that we've got going on today. For now, you can just add it here. It's super easy, and it's super easy to replace when we get the logic in the controller. It's no worries at all. We're going to grab our command list widget reference, get it, right-click on it, convert it to a validated get. This is because if the command list widget is not up, it's going to be not valid, which means trying to call a function, an event, a message on it is going to cause a crash or at least an error. So we want to make sure that it is valid. Only if it's valid, we then want to call the appropriate function. To be able to call these functions here, remember what we had to do in the pause menu. We have to inherit the interface. And so if we go to the command list and we go to class settings actually, and you go to the interfaces section and look at implemented interface, yours will most likely be empty unless you added one on your own. For us, we're going to add that widget navigation interface. I already have it, so you won't see it in my list, but it will be here for you. Once you select it, it will go under here. At that point, I'm implementing this interface, and so I can call functions on it. I can perform the messages on it. So I have my command list widget reference, and I can call move up message, move down message. I could call confirm, but I don't need to in today's episode message. And lastly, the new one, back message. So the way I set it up is that when the input action menu down P1 and menu up P1 get called, they still go through the pause menu logic because we still want to do that. But if the command list widget reference is valid, then we actually call it on here. So move down on the command list widget and move up on the command list widget. The confirm does not do anything with it. And then I've added a new event in here that we didn't use for the pause menu, but you could if you want to, and that is the return P1. So if I go into my project settings, you can see I have return P1, which is either backspace on the keyboard or gamepad face button right, which again on an Xbox controller would be the B button. With those set up, I can now grab this input action. I made that, many episodes ago, so you might already have it. But you can search for return P1 or whatever you named it and just grab it here. I already have one. When you get this here, make sure you select the appropriate settings in the details panel. Like the other ones, okay, you can look at them and see what we have. You need to make sure that you consume it. Well, consume input's fine. You don't have to do it. Depends on your setup. We can do it for now. It's not going to hurt anything. But execute when pause definitely has to be checked, because right now the command list is referenced from the pause menu. So we can actually only access it from the pause menu, which case the game is going to be paused. So we need to make sure we have execute when paused, and we don't want to override the parent binding. If we're using this in the code or other blueprints, parent blueprints for this, we don't want this to override the other ones. So we don't want to have that checked. All right, with this done, we'll be able to actually call those events inside of the command list. So to do that, you need to go into your command list, and you need to now search for the events. So it's very simple. Event move up. We need that one. We need event move down. And I'm also going to grab my event back now. You could go and grab event confirm if you want, but I don't need it for today. All right, now this logic is pretty easy actually. I think you'll be happy with it. It's pretty simple, but it's very effective. So now what we have to do is go through, and as we're moving through the commands, determine which command we're on, and then change its style or play an animation on it or do whatever just to show to the user and the player that they are on that command. So the first thing I do is I grab my event move up. We'll start with that one. And for me, moving up is going negative on my index, right? Because we start at the top of the menu, so my current index is 0. Whereas my maximum selection is the button on the bottom, the command list button on the bottom. the bottom command is the last one, so I have it at the highest index. So if we're moving up, I'm going to subtract 1 from the current index. So I grab this. I'll write it alongside of this. Integer minus integer. We have current index minus 1. We want to make sure this is greater than or equal to 0, because 0 is our lowest possible value in that scroll box. You know, we can't have an index lower than 0 here. We start at 0. So we got to make sure it's greater than that. If it is, we bring it into a branch. If it is, we then set the current index equal to current index minus 1. So if this is greater than 0, we use this value to set current index. So this is basically just a decrement, but we're making sure that it is greater than or equal to 0 before we do it. Otherwise, we don't change anything about current index. All right, that's good enough for now. We'll get into determine selection last, because that is the last part that we have to do for event construct, move up, and move down are all going to use it. So you should have this now. And now let's go ahead and fill out move down. So move down is the opposite of move up, right? We're adding to the index. So we take our current index, integer plus integer, add 1 to it. We make sure that this value is less than the number of max selections. This is good because this is going to go into the vertical box, the command elements vertical box, and grab the index of that command. And so we don't want it to be equal to max selections, or it'd actually be 1 too many, since the index starts at 0 in the vertical box. All right, so if current index plus 1 is less than max selections, this branch returns true, then we set current selection to be the result of current index plus 1. Again, the same as move up, just the opposite. Now it's time to go over determine selection. So you can go ahead and add a function and call it determine selection. I have no input or output parameters. And we're going to call it in 3 places. Let's go back up to event construct for a second. You can call it here without filling out the data. We'll fill it out in a second. So on completed of the first for loop in the event construct, not the middle one, because you don't want to call determine selection on every single command list element. That would be too much. So once we've set up all the commands, once this first for loop has completed, not the second one, but the first one, drag off completed and call your new function, determine selection. All right. And then in move up and move down, you can also go ahead and call these now if you'd like. But I'll remind you of that at the end, so you don't have to. Right now, let's go into determine selection. And so what this is going to do is it's going to take the index that we're on, our current index, and it's going to associate it with the command in the vertical box, and then change its style to know that we are on that command currently. Again, you could also play an animation if you want to bring the command list element out, like just slide it to the right a little bit to say this is the one we're on. However you want to do it, it's fine. Just as long as you can indicate some way to the user that that's the one they're on. I just chose change in styles because I think that's simple enough, and also it looks pretty good. Okay. So in determine selection, I grab my command elements vertical box. Again, this is the vertical box that contains all of the commands. Okay. So we have these individual ones here, right? But the command list itself, it can have like 17, 20, however many commands I have on this mutant. So I grab this and I get all children, and this is going to have as many children as you have commands on that character. We're going to loop through it. All right. Now it might get a little bit confusing here for a second, but let me show you what's going on. So we're looping through all of our commands. There's only going to be one command selected at a time. So the one command that's selected needs a different style than all the other commands. The other commands should all be cleared and set back to the standard style. So we take our right index and make sure it is not equal integer, our current index. That is going to be reset to the standard command list style. But if it is equal to the current index, then it's going to be set to the selected command list style. Okay? So if the array index is not equal to current index, we'll go through the true branch first. We're going to take this current command element, understand this array element is going to be the command list element. All right. So we have to cast it to this because we need to grab the specific image here and change its style. I'm changing this style, this border here, this image. By the way, while we're on this image, this isn't super important, but I did change the image a little bit. I made it better. Before, I had it as a style of box, draw as a box, not an image, and had to set the image size to a larger value. This was mainly me being lazy in the past because of the way I had made the image and it was too small for what I wanted. I went ahead and cleared that up and made it look nicer and bigger. So I made it draw as an image again. And I just gave it whatever image size I wanted at this point. It's totally cool if you want to leave it the way you have it. I just wanted to show you. If you notice mine's different, that's all I did. No trickery here. Nothing's getting skipped. I just made it better by not making the image too small. I decided to fix that up so we don't have any issues with it going forward and it's not blurry or ugly or anything like that. But anyway, so that's what we're trying to change, right? So we need to cast the array element from the for loop to this specific widget. Because this array element is just a widget object reference, it won't have that specific command border image. But we know all the children of that scroll box are going to be of this class, so it's safe to do. So we can cast it to our command list element. Then we can drag off of it and grab our image, which I call command border. One more time, it is this right here. It is the entire thing. The actual image, not the text, not the inputs, but the image. And then we can drag off the command border and call set brush. Get a node that looks like this. You can right click on the in brush and split the struct pin, and then you'll get this. All I do now is I set my command list border to be the one that is the default value. For me, that's called command list border, not command list border selected, because the one I use on my widget by default is command list border. Command list border selected is this one. It's the gray one. Okay. Command list border is the blue one. The blue one is the default. That's the one we want to set in this top branch here. But if current index is not equal to the array index, returns false. This means that the current index is equal to this array index. That means that we are trying to change the style of the button that the user is currently selecting, which means we have to use the selected image for the command list element. So I have this here as a demonstration, but you can actually use the index. Okay, so let me show you what's going on here. This is basically saying, if this was confusing, because I thought it was a little confusing to look at, basically what we're saying is we take our command list vertical box, we get the children at the current index, and then we cast it to the command list element. Alternatively, you can simply drag off the for each loop and do that as well. Just understand why you're doing it that way, right? If you do it this way, let me just clean this up and move these guys out a little bit. There we go. And so now the array element can go into each of these. But we cast it to the command list element just like we did above. I grab the command border just like we did above. And I call set brush just like we did above. However, this time, I'm not using the same command list border, but instead I'm using my command list border selected right here. So there's command list border selected. There's an additional thing we need to do here, and that is, believe it or not, this is how we can make it so that when we're going through our options, going through those commands, this will automatically scroll for us. It's very convenient. So instead of trying to track where we are based off our selection, the scroll box can know based off what widget we pass it. So it will scroll to the widget for us. And it looks really nice too. So we only want to do this if we're on that selection, because we don't want to be moving to all the different ones that get reset. Otherwise, it would always be animating to different spots. That's not what we want. We only want to animate to the one that the user has currently chosen. So we can actually take the cast of the command list element here and use that to determine where the scroll box should scroll to. It's that convenient. If we take our command list scroll box variable, we can call a function that says scroll widget into view. Then you just pass it the command list element, and you're good to go. You can choose a few different things, like into view, which is as soon as it comes into the view, it'll stop. You could send it to the top, but that looks a little funny when you're scrolling down one at a time. Or you could send it to the center, so you have as much room, the same amount of room above and below this option. Animate the scroll makes it so it doesn't just snap, but it does a nice little lerp to it. That looks better in my opinion. So adding this little node allows us to scroll up and down the scroll box very simply. Let's go back to the event graph. And make sure that you call determine selection now if you haven't already in move up and move down. And then also, for added effect, I'm just adding some sound effects. I know the sound effect I'm using is back out, but I actually ended up liking the sound that I intended for back out to be for moving up and down this menu. So I'm using that, but it doesn't matter. Just use whatever sound you want. It is a widget, so I just play a 2D sound. And just select your asset. Okay. Pretty convenient. Pretty simple. Now, there's two other things we need to cover. So one is the back button. And then two is something to do with the gamepad scroll, and we'll get to that in a second. So let's go over the back button. Super simple. The back button here, if you click on the button in the design view, you can scroll down the details panel and add on pressed, which means if we click this button, it will do whatever logic is tied to this event. So I decided to play a sound effect and then remove the widget from the parent. So we'd get rid of the command list widget, we'd go back to the pause menu. Well, that's pretty much good. You don't have to do more than that. If you click on this, it'll work. It'll play a sound and it'll remove it from the parent. However, I also wanted to add the ability to not use the mouse, but use my back button on my keyboard or on my controller. And so I made sure to grab the event back in here and just tie them to the same logic. All right, now with that done, there's only one other thing we need to go over for today's episode, and I just want to actually show you something that I changed for the gamepad scroll. I actually changed the input for it because before we were using the gamepad right or gamepad left thumbstick y-axis. And so if we were using the left thumbstick, we would scroll down. However, move down P1 uses the gamepad left thumbstick down. So we can move down one at a time through this input action when using a controller already with no changes required. And so I figured if we want to keep the scroll, we should just do that with the other thumbstick. That way we can still move down one at a time with the left thumbstick, but the right thumbstick could scroll through the whole box. So I changed it to gamepad right thumbstick y-axis, and I had to change the scale to 1.0. I was actually using a negative 1.0 scale for the left thumbstick y-axis, and it was working, which was strange. But there you go. I changed it to the right thumbstick and set the scale to be 1.0, and now it works as intended. So there you go, guys. That's all I got for you today. But hopefully you enjoyed, and hopefully this helped you make your command list a little bit better, a little bit more sophisticated, and more exciting to use. If it did, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do. I just really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon members and supporters. Thank you guys so much for everything you've done. I am so incredibly grateful, and I appreciate it more than you know. It helps me out so incredibly much, and seeing all the support that you guys have given me just continues to get me excited to work on these games, so thank you so much. If you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I'd be happy to assist you. It's completely free. Like I said, guys, that's all I got. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye, guys.